Hi, welcome again to this lesson series about virtual environments and devices. This week is intended to provide you with the knowledge of some relevant aspects of the human senses needed for VR. Our senses provide us with the key information about ourselves and our environment, such as the identities and locations of objects, the speed of our movement within the environment, and the safety of substances that we ingest. In order to convey information correctly and efficiently, we must understand the processes of perception and cognition. What is perception? There are many definitions and theories about perception, but it's a process of recognizing, being aware of the sensory information, organizing this sensory information, that's gathering and storing it, and interpreting, that's binding the sensory information to the knowledge. So perception deals with the human senses that generate signals from the environment through sight, hearing, touch, smell and taste, whereby vision and audition are the best understood systems. But the system is not perfect. It makes assumptions to overcome the ambiguity. But it's important to realize that the response of the human system to sensory input can vary greatly between typical individuals. The extent of discomfort, pleasure in response to such input will depend on two factors. The properties of the stimulus itself, that is, the intensity or frequency, and the subjective relation the individuals have with the stimulus. This last aspect can be further dismantled in three separate components. The physiological sensitivity of a person, that is the level of their absolute thresholds. The psychological or attitudinal factors, where they have already negative connotations with a certain stimulus. And the environment that a person is inhabited to, that is moving from a rural area to an urban environment, may prove uncomfortable at the beginning. So remember, there are much more other factors that involved than only a stimulus for a perception. So, several senses. You see them here summed up. Some need some clarification. They are rarely mentioned, I think. But the first five you know. We have equilibrioception. That is the vestibular sense for balance and acceleration. It helps prevent humans and animals from falling over when walking or standing still. Thermoception, that's the feeling for cold or hot, of course. Nociception, that's the sense for physiological pain. Proprioception, that's a sense that indicates where various parts of the body are located in relation to each other. So it's an awareness of the position of one's body. The stimulus occurs by moving or train in muscles and joints. Of course, in a virtual environment you can give humans also animal senses, so non-human senses like electroception, echolocations like bats have, magnetoception, pigeons have that, or use of polarized light for direction and detection, which senses bees have. So senses as filters. The process is, as we saw, a stimulus gives, that's a physical pulse, gives a sensation, a bioelectric impulse via nerves, and that gives an understandable signal. That's a perception. But senses work as filters. As with all sensory systems, our senses have a finite dynamic range, a sensitivity range. So signals, stimuli are damped, they are quelled, suppressed during their way to perception. And there's also a minimal stimulus, there's a threshold for stimuli. So considering the auditory system, for example, humans are typically able to hear sounds between 12 Hz and 20 kHz, although the frequency range reduces with age. Moreover, we cannot hear sounds of very low sound pressure levels, and sounds above a certain amplitude will cause us pain and also potentially can damage the auditory system. It's obvious that the comfort range, the dynamic range for hearing will vary between individuals. So let's look at the auditory system. It is our major means of obtaining information about our environment, so also for the virtual environment is use of sound very important. In the picture you see the different parts of the auditory system. The outer ear is visible and collects sound waves, and these waves travel down the auditory channel and collide against this membrane, the eardrum, and that starts to vibrate. Then a lot of physics happens, filtering and diffraction and reflection, dispersion, resonance, and this part is called the middle ear, and it's containing the membrane, the stapes and the ear bones. To amplify the sound. It's connected via the oval window here to the cochlea, which is a part of the inner ear. The inner ear converts the sound waves in electric pulses in this cochlea. But it also contains apparatus called semicircular channels that maintains the body balance. It are three semicircular channels. They are orthogonal and filled with a fluid, and that fluid moves and gives if the head moves, so then it gives a stimulus to the vestibular nerves, and via the nerves the signals just want to go to the brain to process the signal further. But sound also arrives from elsewhere, to the tissue or bones by conduction. So let's look at here at some attributes of sound. So sound are pressure changes in a medium, mostly in the air, and that causes a traveling vibration. Like you see here with the guitar, the pluck string is the cause of the pressure difference in the air, and condensations and dilutions of air molecules move at a speed of 350 meters a second through the air. Pitch, that's the number of oscillations of the wave per second, and determines the tone and frequency of the sound. So human frequency ranges in 20 or 20,000 hertz. So the number of oscillations per second determines tone. So okay, this frequency is expressed in hertz, and this is Mr. Hertz. So a pure tone is just one frequency, and I've here three examples of that. $125. Difficult to hear, but it's 5000 hertz, and this is octave, and that means a doubling of frequency. So it's 500 and 1000 hertz. So these are pure tones. So this is another aspect, it's sound pressure. And the sound pressure is in the unit Pascal. And the threshold here is 2 times 10 to the power of minus 5 Pascal in the air, and that's the hearing threshold. So sound pressure is the attribute which is proportional to the amplitude of the sound, and the power of sound is mostly specified in decibels. So decibel. So we use decibels instead of Pascal. So man has a huge range in perceived loudnesses, 120 decibel with a sensitivity of 1 decibel. Here we see the dynamic range for humans. So when you use it in sound pressure, you get 10 to the power of 12 difference. So that's a lot. So we're using decibel. That's easier. So 120 decibel, then the pain is happening in your ears and even loss of hearing. There are 60,000 hair cells in your cochlea, and when they are damaged they are not replaceable, so you get deaf. Maybe also interesting is speech, which decibel you are. So when you're whispering you are about 30 decibel, and a normal conversation, so in an office or at home, is about 60 decibel. A little bit busy, but it's normal. Another aspect is timbre. So a pure tone has 1 frequency, it's a sinus wave. So a timbre is a combination of frequencies. It's a ratio, so the low frequency are dividers of the higher frequencies, and it's what you experience when you listen to a complex sound. So it's a combination of pure tones. And when you have different instruments who vary in timbre, they can have the same pitch or loudness but still sound different. So let's listen to some sounds with the same basic frequency. Let's first put this here, so it's sinus. Sinus from 5, they're all 500 hertz, you see. So that's the same basic frequency for a block, but it has some higher frequency, so it sounds sharper. And the sawtooth has more higher frequency, so it sounds more sharper. So it is also called timbre. It's also called the sound color, and it depends on the strength of the overtones. That are the higher frequencies. So noise. So noise is a sound with a summation of random frequencies, and then you get noise. So it's no sound anymore, but all kind of frequency together. Here you see the route the sound travels from the source to perception. It will be apparent that the signal has undergone a change on this pathway from source to brains. For instance, the background noise is combined with the sound of the source, as you see here in the global signal. So frequency range, humans have a frequency range from 20 until 20,000 hertz, but bats have about 150 kilohertz, and moles, you know, the blind animals in the ground, they have 1 hertz. For humans, the most sensitive part is between 200 and between 2 and 5,000 kilohertz. Here about 1 until 4,000 is a little difference. For the frequency of the human voice, it's about 50 and 7,000 hertz speech. Okay, so there are a lot of differences. Here you see the sensitivity curve. It's a logarithmic plot. These lines are lines of equal loudness, so contours, and this one is a threshold, so there's no 0 decibel, and then we go higher until 120 decibel, and you see the dynamic variation gets smaller, so the sound appears to have the same sound pressure. But at low and high frequency you need more loudness to get the same impression for the sound. Here I have a demo about loudness. Noise with the same loudness is filtered over different octave bands, so 100s, 200s, 400, etc. But you hear a louder sound in the bands between 800 and 5000 hertz. So that's corresponding with the sensitivity curve here. Let's listen to it. So it is clearly audible. Direction of sound. Sound comes at us from all directions and distances, and individual sounds can be distinguished by pitch and tone, loudness, and by their location in space. And this last one is, I think, the most interesting property of human hearing, our ability to localize sounds in 3 dimensions. And we have some 3D sound location cues for this, thanks to our 2 ears. So one cue is the difference how the sound arrives at 2 ears, the difference in time, in frequency and amplitude of the sound. So this is due to the different sound paths they have. The second, there is a sound reflection and reverberation, dispersion of the sound waves to the head and shoulder and external ear. So that's the interaction with the physical makeup of the listener, and that's also an important cue. So these interactions are characterized by a complex response function called the head-related transfer function. To get this HRTF experiments with human models or pure mathematical calculations can be done. So here's a link to a database with measured HRTFs. So they used a dummy head microphone, so you can find a lot of different measurements. So we talk about binaural or spatial sounds now. It's different than mono and stereo because it takes the aspects we talked about in the former slide in account. And so spatial or binaural recordings are reproductions of sound the way humans hear it real, with 2 ears. And for VR, the simulation of realistic spatial sound cues in the virtual environment can contribute to a great sense of presence and immersion. So there are a lot of demos to be found on the internet with binaural recordings. If you try them out, use the headphones to get a nice result. So here I put some demos, but this one is an old goodie, the barber shop. Yeah, we can try it. So let's do it.
Hello there. How are you? Yes. You are here for the virtual haircut? Yes. Okay. I will go get Luigi. He will come and cut your hair. I am Manuel. Just stay right there. Luigi. 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 It's Manuel here. The person is here for your virtual haircut. You better come up. He is coming up right now. And meanwhile, I will go over here and play the music with the guitar because that is what I do here at the barber shop.
Okay. So I think you try them out, but maybe a mosquito. So it's simple but convincing, this mosquito, I think. So, but realize that when the headphones are used in a virtual environment and a listener moves her head and signals sent from the ears are not modified, then the configuration of sources appears to move. So, if we use this virtual world, periodically recalculations of the relative position of the source and modifying the HRTF accordingly is necessary, otherwise you get a strange results. So next to the orientation senses, they control the sense of movement and balance. We saw earlier this model here with the 3 semicircular liquid-filled channels perpendicular to each other. And when the head moves, the liquid moves. So the liquid movement is recognized by small hairs and a flexible valve in the inner ear. So this system helps the eyes to compensate the head movements. But if there is a mismatch between signals from the vestibular system and, for example, the visual system, then these signals will produce conflict. And examples of such a conflicts occur in the nature when you are watching a moving train while sitting in the other one, and then you're sensing that it's yourself who is moving. So the system can be tricked in a VR environment, and some research centers develop possible tools to help patients to rehabilitate from vestibular disorders. On the other hand, motion sickness can be one of the consequences of this mismatch. So skin senses, a lot of stuff is embedded in our skin, as you can see here. We use the skin to identify objects, communicate feelings and protect us from injuries. So we have different receptors for touch, temperature, pain, itch and pressure to provide stimuli. The tactile sense, touch, is the most pleasurable of all senses, and we can identify objects accurately and quickly with it. People can rapidly and accurately identify 3-dimensional objects by touch. Just close your eye and try to identify an object. It's not too difficult. Certain areas of the skin are more sensitive for touch than others areas. For fingertips and the tongue are very sensitive. Pain is associated with actual or potential tissue damage. This is a result of pressure, and pressure is a physical stimulus for touch. It can be measured by means of detecting the amount of indentation of a skin. This kind of pain is called static pain, but you also have dynamic pain, and refers to pain that do brushing of the skin. So then we have temperature, yeah, it's necessary because body regulates temperature. So to do so, it needs to sense the temperature. Skin adapt to stimuli, so there is a decrease in responsiveness of a sensory system that is confronted with a constant stimulus. So, some words about olfactory. Humans are very sensitive to smells and are able to detect some odors at very low concentrations. Furthermore, smell can have a profound effect on many aspects of perception and cognition. For example, our perception of flavor is strongly affected by smell, and loss of the former can have a profound impact on the ability to taste. In addition, there have been studies demonstrating that smells can have significant effect on emotion and social preferences and moral judgments and even behavior regulation. So it seems logical that odor is widely used to influence people or to bring them in different moods. Like happens in shopping malls where scent diffusion is subtle used, and they call it subliminal advertising. Yeah, once there was a film that used a system with odor, it released odor during the projection of the film, so the viewer could smell what was happening in the movie. So you can read it here in the Wikipedia. Nice story. I think it was the first and only time something like this is done. So use of odor in VR system also seems to be logical, but it's rarely used. There's no practical display system or device to simulate the effects of smell. Yeah, little commercial or research work has done in this area. The problem is that it's not possible to compose a new scent from basic components, so like you can do with color. And once a scent is in the air, there's a problem of quickly removing it, of course. Yeah, the residual will stay long in the air. So let's hope up on a breakthrough in the near future. The visual system has the full attention of VR developers, and that is justly, of course, because seeing is our most important sense. It detects and discriminates between an incredible diverse assortment of stimuli. Think about chromatic versus achromatic, emotion or not in emotion, patterned or unpatterned, and of course two-dimensional or three-dimensional. So it's a very flexible system. But research on human visual capacities is still an active field. There are still many aspects of visual performance that are not well understood, so especially how an image is formed in your mind. Here you see again the process of perception in the case of a visual system. The stimulus, the light pulse, gives a sensation, and a bioelectric impulse comes from the retina, and there's perception in the visual cortex. So let's look at the eye. The eye is a marvelous organ, I think, yet its construction is quite simple. An image is focused on the retina. Here you see the retina, number 12. It's an image plane with a complex net of light receptors, the cones and the rods. Here we see the cornea, that's the front surface of the eye for protection, also here of course from this side. Then the lens. It's elastic, and the form is changed by 6 muscles for accommodation. And the lens is of course transparent and helps to refract light to focus on the retina. It's more spherical for projecting near objects, and flatter for projecting far away objects. So the pupil here and here, of course, is necessary to control the light to the retina, to control the luminance on the retina here. It works like an aperture in a camera. So the eye pupil diameter changes during the day and night. During the day the pupil size is between 3 or 4 millimeter. In the night it's more 5 to 9 millimeters. So it's much wider in the night. The iris, that's the blue in this picture, forms the pupil optical aperture. Here we have a blind spot, also called scomata, also called optic disc here, and it's the location where the optical nerve is connected to the retina. So there are no light detecting photosensors in this place. The brain fills in with surrounding detail with the information from the other eye. So the blind spot is normally not perceived. Okay, and the last one is the fovea. That's here, and that's located in the center. In the center of the retina, and connected also, of course, to the optical nerve. This spot is responsible for sharp vision, necessary where visual detail is important, like reading things. So that's anatomy of the eye. There's much more to know about this sense. You can look at this marvelous webbook about vision with beautiful images in it. Here you see a cross-section of the retina. The retina is a complex layer with many neurons and photoreceptive cells, and as you can see, the receptors are deep in the retina. The light goes through the layers to reach these receptors. So the receptors are upside down and plentiful, closely packed. The types, as earlier mentioned, are rods and cones, and the rods have a maximum sensitivity about 510 nanometers, and they are very sensitive for luminance, but less for color. So the optimal adaptation to dark is in about 30 minutes, so it takes some time. The cones are not very sensitive. Maybe you know the saying, all cats look grey in the dark, and that's true because the color sensors don't work with a little light. The cells here in the retina already do some signal processing. This is necessary because there are only about 1 million optic nerves, and much less that number of rods. That's much less because rods are about 120 and also 7 million cones. So data compression about 100 times is done already here before the signal transport. So there's a difference made in intensity and color information in these cells already for data compression. Here you see a distribution of the different receptors over the retina. There are more rods with respect to the cones in the middle of the eye, so the outside, so there are more rods on the outside, so more in the peripheral of the eye, while the cones are mainly found here in the central novia. You can see the big red peak here in the picture, so they're concentrated around the fovea. You also see the blind spot here where no cells are found. So via the optical nerve, the signals go to the visual cortex of the brain for processing. So there are three types of cones, called RGB or LMS. They're often called RGB because the peak is in the red wavelength, and this peak is in the green wavelength, and this peak is in the blue wavelength. So that's the reason why. You can see they have different population response distributions. So red is about, you can see it here, 64% red, 32% green and 2% blue, and the blues are much more sensitive than the other ones. So in the book I put a normalized version of the distribution, and then you see that the effect is almost the same. But blue is younger in the evolution. That's the reason why it's less blue sensors. Humans are very sensitive to electromagnetic radiation in a range of 370 until 730 nanometers. The eye turns the wavelength into the perceived color, and different combination of wavelengths give more colors. And the eye can distinguish about 150 wavelengths with 2 nanometer apart from each other. What you see here is are the various light sources that provide a broad band of radiation across and beyond the visual spectrum. They have a completely different wave distribution, as you can see, and of course this will reflect in the color perception. So this is the noon sunlight, and this is a lamp, and this is another type of lamp. So color perception, the color perception mechanism is not completely clear. But colors are important within the design. Colors influence the mood of people. These design aspects belong to the lesson of virtual content creation, so I won't talk much about it. But this star shows complementary colors, and when placed next to each other, they create the strongest contrast and reinforce each other. So you widely use in art and design this star. So show red against cyan and yellow against blue, and that kind of tricks. Here you see the creation of a color in two systems. This is an additive system that's used in the digital world. You can create colors by adding 3 basic colors. We talked earlier about it, the RGB colors. The colors you make, we call it altogether a color space. As you can see here, the color space of RGB is a cube, and it's mostly used here. And so what you can see here is that when it's total absorption, that you get black, and when you, that's the origin of the cube, and total reflection, then you are here, gives white, the opposite corner of the origin, and all other positions give a mix of these 3 colors for the 3 axes. So there are points in this color space. So here you see the subtractive system, and that system is used for real painting. Combine colors on a palette. Here you see RGB picture of a mandrel composed of 3 layers RGB. So red, green, blue, and put them together and we get this beautiful picture. So when I show them as a grayscale, then you see that they have different values. So here red has a high value for the nose, and blue has a low value for the nose. So the nose gives information how red it is. So high values you get back here. Yeah? So you can use these pictures for this analysis. And this is another color space called HBS, or hue saturation brightness. It works more how human perceive colors, so it's more used in design also. And you see that the color space is a cube, not a cube. No, it's a cone, not a cube as we did with the RGB. So hue is closely related to the wavelength of the stimulus. Different colors have different hues. Then we have saturation, and saturation is related in how much white content is in the stimulus. So monochromatic hues are very high saturated, and the least saturated color is white. So for example, a pink color would be less saturated than a spectral red, because more saturated than white. Here we see the brightness, and it's related to the amount of light coming from a source of being reflected from an object. So that's about color. Light energy is transmitted in wavelengths from a source, for example a lamp, and reaches indirect by reflection the eye, or direct, that's also possible. The objects from a scene reflect, transmit and absorb light, and the light goes through the lens in the eye, and light converts on the retina in the back of the eye, and note that it's upside down. Field of view, we talked about this already. Field of view maximum horizontal is about 200 degrees, I think. I can see my hands now. And vertical about 120 degrees. But of course the result changes because of the luminance of the background and the target, the wavelength, and of course it varies also among humans. In the picture you can see there's an overlapping stereoscopic area, so that's a small area here. Although a wide field of view is important for VR because of the better immersion, it's also more prone to simulation sickness, and has less resolution. So there's a risk of pixelization. Acuity, visual acuity. In general, people's acuity is about 5 arc minutes. That's reading a character from 0.9 centimeters on a distance of 6 meters. Then words on a page of reading material are sharp and clear. Visual acuity is the spatial resolving capacity of the visual system. It is necessary to see fine detail. An image of a point source, what you see here, these objects are points, will be distributed on the retina as a point spread function. So here you see it again. So 2 point spread functions, and they are separated with this angle theta minimal, and you can make a calculation for this angle with this formula. It's 1.22 times wavelength and divided by the diameter of the pupil, or a disc. So that gives the resolution of your eye, the acuity. So if the distance comes too small, then these peaks overlap and you can't discriminate anymore between 2 points. But there are a number of other factors that also affect visual acuity, so like refraction errors, illumination, contrast, and also the location of the retina where the sensor is stimulated. So next property of vision is brightness. That's how much light something emits in perception. So it's perceived, not measured. What we perceive as bright depends on the luminance and the adaptation of the eye. The eye senses brightness logarithmically. For example, if it's dark and you put on a lamp of 100 watt, you get some brightness in perception. And if you put on another lamp, you don't get the same amount of brightness, of course. You don't get it extra. So if you go further with it until say 100 lamps, you don't have a brightness perception 100 times more than one lamp, right? So the response is not linear but logarithmic, and the sensitivity of the eye decreases as the magnitude of light increases. So there's an adaptation. So brightness is a subjective attribute of light, to which humans assign a label between very dim and very bright or something like that. So brightness is what we perceived when what's perceived when light energy falls on the rods and cones in the eye's retina. So the decrease is also known as the Weber's law, delta L, the luminance divided by L. So that's called perceived brightness. Luminance is the measurable quantity, so which most closely related to the brightness. Measurements can be done with a luminance photometer. So luminance is measurable. Sight is very sensitive to contrast, and contrast sensitivity is a measure of how faded or washed out an image can be before it becomes distinguishable from a uniform field. So contrast is how dark to how light something is, and it's a ratio. The minimum difference in grayscale level that an eye can detect is about 5% of that fully brightness. Contrast sensitivity is a function of size and pattern of the features in the image. So here you see a curve from an experiment in the image. You see the luminance of pixel is varied on this horizontal axis. It's sinusoidal varied in horizontal direction. So the spatial frequency pattern increases, and you see that it's exponential from left to right. But the luminance from the signal remains constant along a horizontal path through the image. So if the detection of contrast was dictated solely by the image contrast, then the alternating bright and dark bars here should appear to have an equal height everywhere, a straight line here. However, the bar seems to be taller here in the middle, and so it's not constant, but it changes with the pattern. So that means that constant contrast depends on the pattern in an image. So we are sensitive to patterns in an image. Below you see all kinds of information in one table. There are three modes of the eye function under different luminance levels. Here you see different luminance levels from -6 in this unit until 8. So you see the words belong to a single bright star until photo flashlight. And here you see the vision modes, and for bright light you see a phototopic here, and the cones are working there. And for low light conditions you see here scutopic, and the rods are working there, and in the middle, an intermediary mode is mesopic, and yes, cones and rods both work in this area. So there's a lot of information in this picture. Visual masking, is the effect that in busy environments changes and differences are not easily recognized. So a black point on a clean whiteboard is immediately noticeable, but if the board is fully written, such a point will not be noticed. So I blended Lena and the mandrel. So here's Lena in the mandrel and here's the mandrel in Lena, with less contrast for Lena and less contrast for the mandrel. But you see that the visual part of the other pictures visible in quiet areas. So like here in the nose you see something of Lena, but here's nothing to find back in the hair of the ape. And here is the same thing with the ape in Lena, because here you don't find anything because it's very busy environment, a noisy environment. Okay, so you can mask things by making the background a little bit more noisier. Stimulus ambiguity. Our world is in 3D, but the retina is a projection plane in 2D. So objects at different distances can have the same projection on the retina. And so we have lost the depth information. See the illustration in these pictures. So human visual system makes assumptions about the environment of the image. So depth cues are used for reconstruction the depth. So depth perception is a visual ability to perceive the world in 3 dimensions, and depth cues are conditions of the visual field that yield perception of depth. So how do we judge depth? So there are 3 types: the primary, the secondary and binocular depth cues. So the primary depth cues, they are a result of stress and strain signals coming from the eye muscles and tendons and ligaments due to the accommodation or convergence of the eye. We already saw this accommodation and convergence mechanism. With accommodation we apply pressure to deform the lens. The amount of pressure on the muscular and the muscular contraction is a depth cue, and it works with one healthy eye, but only in a range about less than 3 meters distance. By convergence, you rotate your eyes, so the line of sight intersects at the point we are looking at. So the amount of rotation is also a depth cue. So that are primary depth cues. Secondary depth cues are also called monocular and pictorial cues, and there are a lot of that kind of cues. So first, texture gradients. Most natural objects are visually textured, and when the image of those objects is projected on a 2D surface like the retina, the density of the texture of the surface increases with the distance between the server and the observer, surface and the observer, as you can see here. Interposition or occlusion, that's when objects are opaque, then those nearby occlude the view of parts of those objects that are further away. So then you convey immediate sense of depth. Here an example of light and shade. The difference in intensity of light reflected from object parts can contribute to the appreciation of depth and 3D shapes. In addition, objects often cast shadows on surface near them, and adding additional cues to figure ground configuration by occlusion and interpolation. And to give occlusion of a shadow by object, casting it can serve as a cue to the distance between the object and the background. Size perspective here. So as an object gets closer to the viewer, it fills up more view space, and by this it looks larger. So larger objects are perceived as more closer to us. The type of object also makes a difference here, because if the user has prior knowledge of the objects, he knows that it's closer or not. Aerial perspective, also close atmospheric perspective. Yeah, light is reflected from objects, always scattering and absorbed by particles in the medium through which is observed, causing near objects to be perceived brighter, sharper, and more saturated than colors from the far objects. So there's a blur and color effect, and that depending on the distance from the user to the user. So geometric perspective, when parallel lines recede in a distance, like here, from an observer, the projection on 3D retina produces a convergence of lines as distance increases. So convergence of parallel lines to point in infinity. Additional depth information is conveyed when the scene is moving relative to the observer. This is called motion parallax. Typical example of this is an observer on a moving train viewing the landscape as it passes. If the observer is fixated a point in the midway between the train and the horizon, objects beyond the plane of fixation appear to move in the direction of the observer movement, but the objects closer to the fixation plane move in the direction opposite of the observer's movement. Now 2 slides with vocabulary. Just read this because there's a lot of jargon in the stereo domain. You see your stereo vision, parallax, fusion, stereoscopy and congruence, etc. Just read it and try to remember these words when you need them. Here you see stereopsis. Each eye captures a slight different view of a scene, in this scene a car, and it's up to the brain to process and to view it in a single 3D view. That adds depth and volume. So here you see the fusion of the car. So 2 images are compared, and the difference between them also gives a strong depth cue, in this case called biocular depth cue. But there shouldn't be a vertical parallax, because otherwise the user feels discomfort, so that parallax should be 0. Here you see 3D perception by wiggling between the right and the left picture. So yeah, there is. So because of the inertia of the processing of the brain, it merges these 2 pictures, so the guy seems to be before the ball here, right? Okay, let's talk about some stereo viewing methods. How do you see in 3D? There are a number of ways to view a stereo pair, but the techniques have one thing in common. To get a 3D effect, you view each of the images with a different eye, as you saw in the former slide. Viewing methods can be passive, active, and autostereoscopic. and the auto-stereoscopic part we already talked about earlier in this course. So passive viewing can be done without glasses, and then it's called free viewing, and here we see a picture of it, or with glasses, like this devices. In free viewing, the separation is based on side-by-side images. These are side-by-side images, and then you review them. So you have to look with this eye on that picture and with that eye on that picture, stare at them and gaze at them, and yes, you have to learn it. It's a technique. It's easier to use parallel viewers with side-by-side pictures. They come in 3 variations: with lenses, with mirrors, and with prisms. Sorry, and sometimes they are used in combinations. So I have the L'Oreal, that's this one, and this is the Focus scope. But there are a lot of different types. You can Google for it, but you can look at this one when you ask me. So this is color multiplexing. The separation of the 2 eyes is based on colors. So passive glasses with color lenses, and yeah, you can direct or superimpose left and right image to the correct eyes based on the colors. So you make the colors the same as the lenses. Examples of this technology include Anaglyphs and Dolby 3D movies. Anaglyphs are popular on the internet and printed materials, and provide the only practical way to view 3D movies displayed on 2D TV sets. Wavelength multiplexing or spectral multiplexing. The visual light spectra is divided in 6 parts, 3 for each eye. Each eye gets a half of the blue range, the half of the green range, and half of the red range. So the eyes get their own band, and the eye can reconstruct full color from these bands, because it's almost complete. This technique is from the company Invitec, and we use it in our cave. Polarization multiplexing. Separation is based on polarization. Like with spectral multiplexing in the former slide, filters are used in front of the projectors and in front of the eyes. Here you see one projector, but using side-by-side means that you need 2 projectors. The 2 filters are the main drawback of these techniques. It halves the light twice, giving a darker image, because the projector takes 50% and the glasses take 50%, so 25% left of the original light. This technology is used for viewing in most movies and an increasing number of TVs and computer monitors. More crosstalk is reported with polarization system than with spectral multiplexing. Another disadvantage is that the screens must preserve polarization as it reflects the image to the viewer. So you need special screens called silver screens. Temporal multiplexing or time multiplexing. Active shutter glasses can direct the left and right images to the left and right eyes by opening and closing shutters in the glasses in synchronization with the stereo pair images being displayed or flashed by the projector. So these are the pairs of images. This was the first technology to be widely used for home TV sets and 3D computer systems. So the images are not side by side, but they are sequential. So these shutter glasses or LCD glasses have lenses containing liquid crystals, and they turn opaque when the small voltage is applied. So there's a battery here, and by firing the voltage each lens can be made independently open and close like a shutter. So because this process happens so quickly, persistence of vision lets you see both images in stereo pair at the same time, and the brain fuses them into 3D images. So like the wiggle examples some slides ago. 27 times a second is needed to get a good fusion for this technique. So this active system uses a wireless transmitter and the image frames are synchronized. Shutter glasses are not widely used in theaters because of the price, the need to clean and charge them between uses. So the system has a lower crosstalk than polarization systems, and only one high-speed projector display is needed. But on the other hand, you need expensive glasses, and the fast refresh rate means that you need a more expensive projector. When stereo viewing, you can see the virtual objects in 3 positions relative to the screen. These positions can be explained with the parallax we talked about earlier. On this slide you see the zero parallax. The projection of the blue and red spot fall together on the screen. The eyes converge in the screen plane when looking at the object, so the object appears to be on the screen. This is the same as in the real world when viewing an object. In this case, the accommodation of the eyes is also at the same point as the convergence point, and that is why the image is comfortable to view. Here you see positive parallax. The points are virtual points behind the screen. When looking at the object, the eyes converge at the point behind the screen plane. Note the parallax. The blue and red point distance is bigger than 0. In this case, it requires convergence behind the screen. However, the accommodation is still on the screen. And the last situation, the negative parallax. The points will be virtual points in front of the screen, and the parallax between the blue and red point is smaller than 0. The effect of this parallax is the most awesome one, but it requires crossing eyes. As you can see, it's uncomfortable for many people. So negative parallax causes objects to pop out of the screen, and zero parallax places objects flush with the screen, and positive parallax causes objects to appear as you are viewing them farther away. So that's it for this week. See you next time.